2025 regular meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission. We are calling this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Item number 2, roll call. Can the recording secretary please conduct the roll call?
Commissioner Alpert,
Here.
Commissioner Avila,
Here.
Commissioner Wallace,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Curtis,
Present.
and Chair Kuznick.
I am here. Thank you. All right, item number 3, the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 4, public comments or written communications. At this time, members of the public may address the Planning Commission on any item not already included in tonight's agenda. If you would like to speak, please fill out a speaker card located in the back of the room and submit it to the recording secretary. We will not be taking any public comment via Zoom. Do we have any communications or speaker cards for non-agendized items?
Not tonight.
Okay, very good. All right, moving on to item number 5. Additions and revisions. Is there anything that we need to add or revise? Seeing none. Okay, excellent. Item number 6, the consent calendar. 6.1, minutes of the Planning Commission regular meeting, March 18th, 2025.
I'll move that we accept the minutes from the March 18th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. And we will be voting on it momentarily. Okay. And the consent calendar is adopted, or calendar adopted 5-0. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 7, continued items after closing of the public hearing. There are none. Item number 8, continued items. Open the public hearing. There are none. Item 9, hearing new items. There are none. Item number 10, non-public hearing action item, the Climate Action Plan update. So.
Good evening, Chair Kuznick and Planning Commissioners. So this item is for the updated Climate Action Plan, or CAP for short. You can think of the CAP as essentially a roadmap for the city to achieve its long-term greenhouse gas reduction targets through the years 2030 and 2045. You may recall that the CAP update was originally part of the General Plan 2040 project, and when that project was adopted in December 2023, the CAP update was continued through a subsequent review process for additional development afterwards. And so since then, for the last year and a half, we've had a number of public meetings. We've had 5 public meetings with the recently formed Climate Action Plan Task Force that the council created to provide feedback and input on the development of the CAP. We've also had 2 public meetings with the Planning Commission to provide feedback and input on the development of the CAP. And then since those public meetings, we've had our consultant team and staff. We've prepared the draft CAP public review documents that are attached to the staff report. And then on April 16th, 2025, the city published the draft CAP public review documents for a 30-day public review and comment period, which is running through May 15, 2025 at 5 p.m. So staff is requesting the Planning Commission provide feedback on the draft CAP public review documents for consideration. Ultimately, the City Council will review the final CAP documents at a future council meeting tentatively scheduled for June 10th, 2025. And as our previous CAP update items we've had with the commission, we have our consultant team from Rincon Consultants here. They're going to give an overview of the specifics and development of the CAP documents and go over that. So I'm going to introduce Kelsey Bennett and Emily Saul to give that presentation.
Good evening. Kelsey Bennett, Environmental and Sustainability Planning Director with Rincon Consultants. So as part of today's draft CAP public meeting presentation, we'll provide an overview of the CAP update effort itself, including the context, purpose, and planning steps. We're going to summarize the greenhouse gas or GHG emissions inventory baseline and forecasts and targets. We'll share the draft GHG reduction measures, which are really the core piece of the CAP planning document itself, and then also discuss next steps and take public comments. So just a reminder of why the CAP is being updated. An updated CAP is a main 2040 general plan implementation strategy. And it's really about reducing GHG emissions community-wide in a manner that's consistent with SB 32, which is your Senate Bill 32, and Assembly Bill 1279, which are state targets regarding GHG reduction measures. And in terms of complying with your general plan, specifically a mitigation measure, GHG-1, in your San Ramon General Plan, EIR, to adopt and implement a CAP that is CEQA qualified. And a quick definition of what a CEQA qualified CAP is it provides substantial strategies for reducing emissions in order to meet those state and local targets, establish a framework for ongoing tracking of GHG emissions, and it undergoes an environmental review input process per CEQA as part of the adoption process. I'm going backwards on slides. Oh, Ryan, I screwed up. How do I go back to slide? Is it showing up okay on the screen? Nope. I took it out of slideshow. Oh, it's back. Okay, thanks. So just a reminder at a high level what those Senate bill and Assembly bill state targets I was mentioning earlier are. In terms of SB 32, that's the goal to reduce your community-wide GHG emissions 40% below 1990 levels. And for AB 1279, that's about reducing your GHG emissions 85% below 1990. And basically, that's referred to in layman's terms as achieving carbon neutrality. And this also helps to achieve multiple community goals, with the goals in the CAP being to lower energy costs, reduce air pollution, both indoor and external air pollution, be able to support economic development and growth, and also improve the quality of life throughout the community. I just wanted to also throw out that a CAP is really a jurisdiction's plan for addressing climate change via reduced emissions to basically represent the community's fair share of those GHG reductions required by the state overall. And also these are listed as co-benefits among many others in the CAP document itself. So what are the planning steps and where are we at today? So when we started this whole CAP planning effort, first started with a baseline inventory. You can think of that as your baseline existing conditions, technical background report, if it was a general plan as a place to start. Then going on to forecast future emissions all the way through 2045 to have something to compare to for those emission reductions planned through 2030 and 2045. And then for next step was to determine a San Ramon specific target, which, at a minimum was to be compliant with those state targets that were mentioned. And then focusing on what was realizable for the community. And then where we're at today on the slide, as you can see, is highlighted our current step is strategy selection and public input. So in terms of preparing the iterations that got to the public draft that's available today, that went through various sectors of where emissions come from and talking about what those look like in terms of specifics with San Ramon, and involving public input, including from the CAP task force process. And also, of course, today, for the draft CAP public meeting and this public comment period through May 15th. And then, after this step will be the funding and the implementation of actually implementing the CAP itself, and also monitoring and tracking the CAP in the long term in terms of city monitoring requirements. So to get back with that first step, what is the baseline of the CAP? Try to give a Cliff Notes version for those who haven't had time to read that GHG inventory baseline in detail in the CAP. Basically, the baseline year that we used was 2019 from when we started this planning effort. And then it involves community-wide activities within the geographic boundary of which the city has jurisdictional control over. So that's specifically city limits. And the main sectors and sources of emissions, as can be seen on this slide, are the on-road transportation, the building natural gas, off-road equipment, electricity, solid waste, and wastewater. And in total, for the baseline year, this resulted in 437,784 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, or CO2e for short. And as you can see from the graph, on-road transportation and building natural gas are the two primary emissions contributors. And then that next step was doing the forecast emissions through 2030 and 2045. As you can see on this line, we first did a business as usual scenario exercise, which means projecting emissions based on if nothing was done differently today, just regular population and employment growth forecasts through 2045. So as you see, that line goes up pretty steeply there. But then also doing an adjusted forecast, which is shown more by the bar graphs and what that does is that's a forecast that takes into account not only estimated population and employment growth, but it also takes into account state adopted legislation that would also help all jurisdictions, including San Ramon, reduce GHG emissions on the face of it in terms of that's just how it will be implemented statewide. So for example, things that will help with that will be the state renewables portfolio standard, which is basically constantly increasing renewables as the source of energy and electricity throughout the state. It's also about the California Building Code Title 24 energy efficiency standards themselves always also being upgraded and improved. And then other things like the state Advanced Clean Cars program that also increases energy efficiency and whatnot when it comes to our on-road vehicles use. So on that graph, you can see the business as usual dotted line top, like I mentioned, goes up pretty sharply, but it plateaus more in terms of the adjusted forecast, taking into account that state legislation. But as you can see from the bottom two parts of each of those graph bars, it is still transportation and building use natural gas that are still those largest sources of overall emissions in that adjusted forecast scenario as well. So after accounting for state and regional laws and programs to reduce emissions on that larger scale that I mentioned, it's really the remaining amount of GHG reductions that are needed, or that delta of emissions reduction needed in the CAP to achieve San Ramon's fair share of the emissions reductions. And that's really what's guiding what the measures and actions are that are included in the CAP itself to meet the targets. Specifically, San Ramon 2030 target is 332,995 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And as such, the delta San Ramon needs to bridge between that 2030 adjusted forecast and the 2030 target is a total reduction of 99,462 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So basically, that's a 53% reduction compared to 1990 levels in terms of per capita emissions. And for further reductions, are needed, as you can see, the larger delta on the further right for 2045 to achieve that net zero emissions by 2045. So therefore, in determining and developing these cap reduction actions, that is the primary scope, if you will, of the cap. And that's what drives the measures and actions themselves. And finally, it's important to note that the cap discusses emission sectors that are both result in emissions within the community, the city limits itself, but also that the city also has the ability to influence. And now I'll turn over to my colleague, Emily Saul, to talk through and summarize the draft cap measures, approach, sectors, and the reduction amounts. Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. So based on this greenhouse gas analysis that Kelsey just walked us through, the city could then move on to the next step, which was strategy selection. So the city has developed strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the community to meet those 2030 and 2045 targets. The strategies represent the overall sector for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And under each strategy, the city has developed measures and actions in the draft cap. The measures represent the approach for reducing emissions in the sector. These are measurable through a performance metric and set within a specified time period. And the measures can be quantitative in that they will directly contribute to greenhouse gas emission reductions in 2030 and 2045, or they can be supportive of the overall cap. The measures then have actions or specific steps San Ramon will take to achieve the measure. And the actions are developed to address one of the 6 implementation pillars. These pillars summarize the types of steps needed for successful climate action planning and implementation. The pillars include structural change, feasibility, equity, funding, education, and partnership. And the draft cap has 7 strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These include the Cornerstone Strategy, which is intended to reflect an important characteristic of the community while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We also have the Building Energy Strategy, Transportation Strategy, Waste Strategy, Water and Wastewater, the Nature-Based Carbon Sequestration Strategy, which includes nature-based solutions that draw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sequester or store it, typically in plants or soil. And finally, we have the implementation strategy, which will enable the city to implement the cap. So the draft cap document presents each strategy within its own chapter. The chapters provide qualitative context for each strategy, essentially why the strategy is important for the community. And the chapters present the measures and actions for each strategy in a table, which we have depicted as an example on this slide. The tables identify the pillars associated with each action. They also identify the expected 2030 and 2045 greenhouse gas emission reduction potential of each measure, or in place of an actual number, it would identify that the measure is supportive of the overall cap. The table also identifies the implementation costs of each measure for the city and the community, and it identifies the co-benefits for each measure. While, of course, the cap goes into more details on each of the measures, we will do a cliff version today to outline the 24 measures included in the draft cap. So under the Cornerstone Strategy, San Ramon's measure is to focus on conserving and managing open spaces, natural lands, and trail systems to increase carbon sequestration on these lands. This measure is supportive of the overall cap. For the building energy measures, these focus on decarbonizing San Ramon's electricity, electrifying both new and existing buildings, increasing the generation and storage of local renewable energy, and monitoring for equitable implementation. For this strategy, measures 1 through 4 are quantifiable with expected greenhouse gas emission reductions in 2030 and 2045. And the other 2, numbers 5 and 6, are supportive of the overall strategy. As for the transportation measures, these first focus on reducing vehicles miles traveled through active transportation, public transit improvements, and high-density housing developments. And of these transportation measures, measures T1 and 3 are quantifiable, with emission reductions expected in 2030 and 2045, while the rest on this slide are supportive. And we have a couple additional transportation measures. These remaining ones focus on converting the remaining vehicle miles traveled to zero-emission vehicles. They also focus on working with Bishop Branch to promote transportation demand management, essentially reducing vehicle miles traveled associated with those commuters, and decarbonizing off-road equipment and vehicles. And on this slide, measures 6, 7, and 9 are quantifiable with reductions expected for 2030 and 2045, and the remainder are supportive. We then have these solid waste measures. These focus on reducing the amount of organic waste sent to the landfill, reducing the carbon footprint of the food system, and applying compost to lands in the community to sequester carbon dioxide. And of these measures, measures 1 and 3 are quantitative, and the second is supportive. We then have the water and wastewater measures. These focus on increasing recycled water in the community and decreasing water consumption in the community, and both of these are supportive. We then have the nature-based carbon sequestration measures, or measure 1 in particular. This focuses on increasing carbon sequestration through nature-based activities such as tree planting, and this measure is also supportive of the overall cap. Lastly, we have the implementation measures. While these are not quantifiable for 2030 and 2045 reductions, they are supportive and critical to the overall success of the cap. These measures focus on educating and engaging the youth on climate action, and also supporting the cap with proper city staff to implement, monitor, and update it. Altogether, implementation of these 24 measures and the subsequent actions would reduce emissions in San Ramon to achieve or meet the 2030 target, as shown on the graph on the left. And the pie chart then on the right shows the breakdown of these expected reductions for 2030. It shows that the majority of these reductions are expected to come from the on-road transportation measures, as well as the energy measures from natural gas. And while not shown here on this graph, the measures and actions do fall short of achieving the 2045 target, the longer-term target for carbon neutrality. The implementation of the CAP's measures and actions will, though, make substantial progress towards this target, but not achieve it. And Appendix D to the CAP, I just want to note, has additional information on the expected reductions of the measures and actions. It goes into the quantification and the evidence behind the 2030 reductions. And as mentioned briefly earlier, each measure and action table within the chapters for the CAP also identifies the cost categories of each measure. These cost categories identify the relative level of effort in terms of low cost, moderate cost, high cost, or no cost or cost savings for each of the measures that will be felt by the city and the community. And we have summarized in this table the results of that cost benefit, or not just the cost analysis. So for the city, almost all the measures are either low and moderate costs, with only a couple being high cost. For the community, most of the measures are either no cost or cost savings, and low cost, with a handful falling into the moderate cost tier, and one having the possibility of reaching higher costs. And the identification of these costs will help the city allocate resources and identify funding needs to implement the CAP. Speaking of, the CAP will be implemented in 3 phases, which are identified in the implementation chapter of the CAP. And the implementation will be informed by ongoing community engagement, regular greenhouse gas inventory updates, biannual progress reports to the public, and a climate dashboard, which will be made available online. And while implementation of this CAP is expected to achieve the 2030 target, if the city finds that San Ramon is off track towards this target, the CAP may be updated before 2030 or specific measures and actions in the CAP may be updated. Similarly, a future CAP update will be needed to develop measures and actions that achieve the 2045 carbon neutrality target. Through the CAP, the city has also established local CEQA greenhouse gas thresholds, which allow for a streamlined CEQA greenhouse gas analysis of future housing and commercial development projects. And these thresholds can be used to show that projects align with the CAP's 2030 target to implement reductions across the community. And the draft CAP document was posted for public review on the city's website and Plan San Ramon on April 16th. And we are looking to receive public comments through May 15th at 5 p.m. And public comments, written comments can be submitted to Ryan Driscoll at the following address and email. And as part of the draft CAP, we also met with the CAP task force on April 24th. They reviewed the draft CAP and provided feedback. They asked for us to consider to clarify certain terms in the CAP. They wanted consideration for the greenhouse gas inventory and CAP updates to be done on an earlier frequency than the 4 to 8 year timeline, established by the General Plan 2040 policy. And the task force also asked for us to consider adding the potential 2030 and 2045 emission reduction numbers to the CAP implementation table. And the task force also endorsed the draft CAP with the minor edits and agreed to changes that were discussed. As for the remaining timeline for the draft CAP, again, public review is open until May 15th. After that, we will be revising the CAP to incorporate comments as needed and produce the final CAP. And then we have tentatively scheduled for June 10th, the City Council meeting to consider adoption of the CAP. And next steps for today would be asking for public and Planning Commission feedback on the draft CAP document. And that is it for the presentation portion. Thank you all.
Okay, at this time, do we have any clarifying questions to either staff or our consultants? Go ahead, Commissioner Wallace.
I have a question. You can flip a coin who answers it. Measure E5 refers to increasing generation and storage of, quote, local community scale renewable energy, close quote. Could you describe for me, please, what you meant by that? I can ask someone, I can pick one.
Yeah.
I usually do.
Yes, thanks for the question. So the Measure 5 is focusing on the storage and generation of local renewable energy. This is, I think, meant to be more distributed energy, renewable energy generation, an example of which would be like rooftop solar.
I'm sure it would be what?
Would be like rooftop solar would be one example for how the community can implement this.
Okay, well, the rooftop solar generally only applies to the house the roof sits on top of. How does that refer to community scale renewable energy? Or is that what you're referring to?
I think a little both, but there would also be, I believe there's a action in there for specifically a pilot or community scale solar project, which would not be on rooftops, you're correct. Would be more for almost like a microgrid for more homes or buildings to access.
So it'd be sort of a storage facility that was open to members of the public?
Yes.
Aren't our public utilities required to provide some type of plans like that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, I just comment also that some of the offices in Bishop Ranch have solar projects such as canopies and battery backup, and essentially a microgrid concept that's at least localized to portions of Bishop Ranch. And so that would also be an example.
Okay, that's sort of a big rooftop development.
But it's at a commercial scale.
Right.
Any other questions?
No.
Commissioner Albert?
I have,
clarifying questions.
I do. Slide 6 or 7 or 8, they all sort of say similar things. And they all highlight the number in 2019. But if I understood correctly, the goal of the cap is to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction versus 1990. Is that right? And then I guess two questions. The graphs don't have 1990, but I assume those numbers are available, and maybe I missed it in the document itself. Is that true? Yeah. Okay. And then
20.
yeah, and then my other question on the 1990 metric, is 1990 and 2020, 2030, are we accounting for any differences in the way greenhouse gases are measured, or are they they're measured the same 25 years ago as they are now, or 35 years ago and now, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, that's a great question, and basically comes back down to the fact that there was, we don't have those numbers specifically for 1990. There is not a 1990 inventory for San Ramon. Of course, 1990 is the reference year that the state mandates use of. So for San Ramon, and what most jurisdictions do across the state, is estimate 1990 emissions by taking the baseline inventory and seeing how state emissions changed between that year and 1990, and assuming that the jurisdiction would have followed similar change in emissions.
Got it.
So
Okay.
it is estimated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That helps. The other question I asked, I had for, I think for Rincon, you made a comment that out of the task force, there was a request to update the dashboard more frequently than what the general plan calls for. And my question is that practical? Do we get the data from whoever provides the greenhouse gas measurement frequent enough to be able to keep the dashboard more current than it might otherwise be?
So the dashboard is more of reporting, monitoring kind of as we go along. I think you might be referring to the GHG inventory, when we would be doing that with our cap updates every
Okay.
4 years, every 4 to 8 years. And we've seen with the current cap, measurable differences take some time in the GHG numbers. They don't happen yearly or bi-yearly or every few years. And so we would recommend maintaining the requirement in the general plan of every 4 to 8 years for a cap update and doing GHG inventories with that. Partly for that reason, you need to have some measurable metrics in the numbers, inventories. Also, getting at what you're asking about too, there is a lag in reporting some of the inventory numbers. We've seen about every maybe 2 years back. So it takes some time to get the numbers also. It's not immediate.
Got it.
And so that's another reason.
Okay, that helps. And then implementation measure 1, it has a highlight education for our youth, which I appreciate. Youth don't tend to make those buying decisions on remodels and cars and purchases. Why the emphasis on youth versus the general population?
I think it's integrated into the outreach with the pillars in the cap to engage the youth and educate. Understanding they don't make the decisions for a lot of the homes or some of these properties, but I think it's part of the overall effort to continue with engagement. with the
Okay,
community.
okay, thank you. And then this is just a couple of questions on process to level set the planning commission. What is the role of the planning commission in approving a cap? I understand what we did when we did like the housing element or the economic element, but for the cap, is there a formal role of the planning commission? Do we ultimately recommend approving, or do we just share comments back up to the city council, or what's the?
Right now, we're asking for feedback and input. There's no land use review or authority with the cap or update to the cap. So we're looking for a recommendation from the commission, but we'll be taking the comments and then making the final revisions based on the comments from the commission and the public to the council.
So it's not exactly like the general plan or a zoning amendment where we have to vote to approve something and then or
Correct.
recommend approval. It's just sort of our comments get passed along and the city council is the ultimate deciding factor.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Curtis? Sorry. Commissioner Abla. She's Pat. Okay,
Okay.
we're going.
Hey, I have a couple questions. My first question is what, on slide 21, there's a cost tier of no cost to high cost, measures. What is that? I guess how do we constitute what's a low versus high measure?
For the cost tier, yeah, we had a cost memo that was developed last year that we reviewed with the CAP task force and with the planning commission in October, November. And there was some ranges for the cost categories. And it changed depending on the city cost or community cost for the various levels. And so there is a range, and some of it is spelled out in the CAP, but some of the details were in that previous cost memo that we had reviewed previously.
Through the chair, just to mention that there's a cost table on page 27 of the CAP document that kind of lays out the blocks of what each category is. They're not specific, and it's not intended to be specific because costs are highly variable depending on who's doing it and what the requirements are. But it was intended as a tool to help staff prioritize certain measures and be able to have some sensing. So.
Thank you. I have one more question. That's a clarifying question. Looking at slide 22, we're meeting the 2030 greenhouse gas emissions and coming below that by about 2,000 metric tons. However, we're not going to be able to meet the 2045 greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll be over that by about 110 metric tons. So would we be in compliance with this state? Because I thought we had to be in compliance with meeting the 2045.
I'll let Kelsey answer that, actually.
So part of this is that most jurisdictions aren't at this time able to show in their caps and can't predict future technologies and all the things that we're going to all need to do collectively to get to that carbon neutrality by 2045. The way that the AB 1279 says is by then. So like, for example, if you were doing a consistency determination against that policy, you could say, yes, you're in compliance because you're showing progress towards achieving it, if that makes sense. Like, you've done the forecast out, you know what you need to achieve in that delta gap from that slide that we showed about how much you have to reduce. You're including measures in here that, as you mentioned, exceed the 2030 target, but they're also showing progress towards 2045. But that's part of the reason there'll be a need for a future CAP update to fully incorporate future technologies and measures and items to get you fully to 2045. And just so you know, that's pretty common amongst CAPs at this point in time, with obviously the nearest term target of the focus right now being to demonstrate how to for sure meet 2030.
Okay, so I mean, we're not meeting it, but technically as it goes on by with the, biannual update and the revisiting of the CAP,
Yeah,
we would get to that point of being zero.
exactly.
with
You
time.
demonstrate it with
Okay.
future updates.
Thank you.
So in the presentation, it says that we're trying to do this to reach quality of life. Who determines quality of life for people? How's that defined? Because here's my question. If you're forcing me to get an EV so we're 100% compliant, or you're telling me I can no longer have a gas stove, who's telling me that that's my quality of life?
So in terms of quality of life, I'm just trying to get to the co-benefit. So there is a place where we had co-benefits in the CAP. Just looking for a page number for you. Which one? Okay, thanks. Page 25 in the CAP. So in general, we identified them generally as improved public health, community resilience and safety, environmental quality and ecosystem services, local economic opportunities, cost savings and consumer benefits, enhanced community character and quality, and sustainable land use and transportation connections. So that is how the CAP has listed out.
Okay.
In general, if you will, we call them co-benefits in there, in terms of what your general question is about. What do you mean by improved quality of life?
So this brings me to my second question then. If I remember correctly from the last time we talked, all 100% of these have to be put in place for us to reach the emissions decrease, correct? Like 100% of all the 48, whatever they're called, measures have to be put into place for us to meet that, if I remember correctly, from the discussion we had back in November. So if we didn't reach 100% of the 48 measures put in place, we would not reach the decrease that we're looking for, correct?
So I just pulled up this slide. So the 7 sectors, there's 24 GHG reduction measures. Those do all have to be
Right.
implemented
Right.
as they are presented right now to achieve the 2030 and to continue to show that progress towards 2045. But I think we mentioned on the implementation slide earlier that part of the biennial progress report would be to check where, as a truth check of like where in the monitoring progress, where you're at, and with the ability to maybe not do a full CAP update, but to adjust measures, if you will. So yeah, there's about 24 total measures, and yes, they each have some actions under each of them. Again, those actions, as Emily summarized earlier, it's really an all-encompassing thing, a holistic thing, because it's both quantitative and it's supportive, and all those things together are the things to achieve the 2030 and show the progress towards the 2045.
Perfect.
I
go
would
ahead.
just add on to that,
Please.
that in many cases, some standards would exceed
Mhm.
and others may not. The other thing to consider is some of this relies on public participation and making certain changes that we have no control over.
And that's going to be my next question.
Okay, but the point is, we have to assess it periodically
Mhm.
and make adjustments as we go. And I would just mention the prior climate action plan, the 2020 targets, we actually exceeded our standards. And that was mostly through joining Marine Clean Energy. That was a big part of it. So there are going to be opportunities that where we may be able to exceed much more than would be typically assumed. I would also argue that, you know, within the ranch, we have a lot of redevelopment, a lot of opportunity to take old technology and convert it to current and new technology. So
At a cost.
but those are things that are already in process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So then I go to my question then about the community cost. So there's, you know, there's 24 measures that the community are part of. 10 and a half of those are in low cost, 4 of those are in moderate cost. So that means it could be up to $30,000 we're asking our community to spend in order to help meet these measures. Right around there, right? So up to $1,000 for low cost, up to $5,000 for moderate cost. It could be 0 to 1,000 or, you know, 1,000 to 5,000. I'm saying at the maximum, it could be up to $30,000 per household. Say we don't get 50% even of the households wanting to do this. So you can say, yes, we could exceed in other places, but the reliance is really on you're asking everyone as we're growing this population as it grows to continue on to keep up with this. And if the measures have to be put in place, and let's say you only get 50% of the people, even if you exceed in other places, you're still in jeopardy of not meeting those numbers. If the community at large decides, A, because of, let's say, current administration laws that are maybe reducing tax rebates on EVs or, you know, decreasing in building of those kind of vehicles or whatever it is, none of us know what the future is going to hold over the next 4, 8, 12 years of the administration and what laws they may put in place. We could be then in jeopardy of spending a lot of money and still not meeting the emission decrease that we're looking at, correct?
I'll start. Yes, you raised some valid points about the uncertainty going forward, and that's one of the reasons why we're treating this as a roadmap to getting there. And we're going to have to take certain turns along the way, find different ways to get to targets. And that's part of the reason why we have to reassess it periodically, because we're really not sure what personal habits of residents are going to be. Whether people are going to move out of the community, into the community, what their tolerance is. We happen to have a very high usage of EVs in this community, but is that going to be the case in 20 years? I have no idea. And so, again, we're taking this as a strategy to go through, but it's going to require constant reassessment and adjustment. And then one last thing is there are measures in here that will affect community costs for certain things, but such as like reach codes, building codes. All those have to go through a separate process with the decision making ultimately coming down to the council. And so they will make informed decisions about going forward. And then also, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's also other measures that make it difficult to get in certain types of appliances. There's also, litigation at the state and federal level that it's going to affect our ability to implement certain strategies. And so it's going to be a process of adapting to the situation we have, but this will give us at least a process to go through and reassess.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Commissioner Alfred, I think you indicated you had another question.
Thank you, Chair. This is back to that process standpoint. So and Lauren reminded us again that this is considered a roadmap, a list of things to do. It's not if we say we're going to implement this as is, that I don't think is possible because it's not a work plan, and it doesn't have resources, costs, all of that assigned to it. So typically would the next step in the process of something like this, building a work plan so that the city knows and the staffing, the resources, the deliverables, all of the normal things you would think in a work plan?
Yeah, so I can touch on that a little bit. So as you recall, we have this climate action task force that was formed by the city council that had two strategies associated. One was to develop the CAP, which they've completed. The second was to explore the feasibility or the benefit of a permanent committee that would create a charter as to the roles and responsibilities. And so that's one part of it. Then the other part is we have a strategy that talks about having a person assigned to be a sustainability coordinator to help coordinate all the efforts between departments. Because one thing I would add is these different subject areas, some of these things we are already doing. We already have waste reduction standards. We already have water conservation standards. And we have green infrastructure standards to the point of the building codes. And so part of the challenge is going to be to coordinate these things between departments and be able to quantify the things we're already doing. 10, 15 years ago, it was about quantifying how many solar panels we're installing. Now it's a requirement of every project. So it really isn't something that we have to quantify in the same way. And then, of course, being able to get better technology, better data available from various service providers also helps, because again, years ago, the technology didn't exist to really track this stuff in the way that they're doing now, and it will just get better over time. I'm a little off point, but the point is we have to be able to reassess or take this plan, the ability to map out a strategy, a work plan, as you said. It breaks it into near term, long term, and near term, midterm, long term, and so we're going to need to be able to evaluate low-hanging fruit in all these different areas to get most bang for the buck. Obviously budget's going to be a concern, and we have to balance competing interests to get it done. So
No, that's very helpful. Thank you, because I just want to make sure I got this correct. The city council will need to prioritize or make available funding and or staffing or both to all of these things that say implement, research, conduct, adopt. All those things sound like new work to me, and I just want to make sure some of the things aren't, but I want to just make sure that if something is new work, somebody needs to sort of sit down and decide what that new work would be. And that's the city council's role, not the planning commission. Got it. Okay. Thank you for that.
Anybody else? Okay, so I have a couple of questions. I'm on page 20 of our climate action plan, which is the chart that was referenced in the slides. And I guess the real question for me is, when you look at this and pulled out my calculator and I pulled out my engineer husband to help me with this. You look at the 2019 starting point, where the black line, the blue line, and the tan line start from, okay, on the left. So for sake of ease of math here, I said, well, it's pretty close to 2020. So if we say, we'll fudge a little bit and call that 2020, and then we look to the right, and then we see 2030. Okay, that's 10 years. Split the difference, bingo, we're at 2025, which is right now. So if you go up to where that intersects the tan line, you can run the math on what that should be right about now. So the question then is, and you see the decline, the slope of the line declining. From 2025 to 2030, that angle the decline gets steeper. Then you go from 2030 to another half of the distance between 2030 and 2045. It continues to descend pretty rapidly until you get down to 2045. But when I read through this, I did not see anything that accounts for how you can mathematically assume those rates of decline. And so the number one question is the rate of decline different because there's less CO2 being produced, or simply it's a measure of per capita and we are increasing our population? Because the numbers look easier if you just add another 10,000 people who don't use any CO2.
I want to go back to the slide.
That one.
So I think part of the question here is that I know in the cap it was an orange or tan line. Now we're looking at the blue line on this slide.
Yeah, it's blue in your slide, yes. On mine,
like
it's
blue.
it's tan. Okay.
Could have color coded that, but we could have. So this is the target pathway.
Mhm.
This is not the line that we're saying the implementation of the cap is going to achieve. This is simply, if you're doing, we're putting straight lines in between the 2030 and 2045 targets, which both align with the state goals, and just drawing a simple straight line and saying, if you were to follow both of these targets on an even straight line path, this is technically where the city would be aiming to go. This blue line, though, is not what we're saying the implementation of the cap will follow.
So this is
It's an average.
hypothetical.
It's an average.
Hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not quite the mathematical.
Which
Yeah.
exactly, the figure is not mathematical for the intermediate
Is there a
years.
place in this plan that we have identified this as not being, mathematically authentic for those who read this?
So if you go down, it's more so in table, you find the table number.
Because it's, when you put a chart, the chart presumes that your facts are accurate, correct? I mean, it was when I was teaching
Yeah,
science.
again, that's the, target pathway to align with state goals, but table 10, there's not reductions in between the 2 years, but
This is-
table 10 shows the actual reductions
Okay.
that the cap is intended to achieve in 2030 and 2045.
Here's table 10, I'm sorry.
It's page 29.
It's right, yeah, okay. Here we go.
So we more so have these specific reductions called out for 2030 and 2045 without, just assuming an average would follow in between those years.
Okay. All right. So the next question that I have is, I know we have a section on waste and wastewater, but it only references Dublin San Ramon Services District. Yet 2/3 of our population are clients of Central Contra Costa Sanitary District. So what was the logic of them not being cited and or partnering or included in this as part of your wastewater chapter?
Just scrolling down to that. Are we talking about WW1 or 2?
That's a good question.
I see in WW1,
It's one of your pillars, what waste and wastewater. Page 32, thank you. Because I will let you know that I did raise the same question with the general manager at Central Contra Costa Sanitary District, and he was quite surprised that it was not included in our city action plan. So,
yeah, I see for water and wastewater, the Dublin San Ramon Service District and the East Bay Municipal Utility District cite it. But seems we should consider adding, unless Ryan.
Is the distinction because it's purple pipe, which is the recycled water program?
Yeah, WW1 is about recycled water,
Yeah.
which is only the water district. So those are the two water districts in Santa.
Okay. Right, fair enough.
So that is correct. Yeah.
So, well, these are not clarifying questions. I will save them for the comment section. Anybody else have clarifying questions? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to open up the public hearing on this topic. And Madam Recording Secretary, do we have items for public comment?
Written communication was received from Alec Hurd and Catherine Grace. I do have speaker cards in front of me. John Larson.
Excellent. Welcome, Mr. Morrison. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My name is John Larson, and I'm educated as an engineer, educated and work as an engineer and a lawyer for the state in fields related to the energy measures and actions in the draft climate action plan. But I am here as a longtime San Ramon resident to support the climate action plan as a positive step forward. And it's important to look at the big picture. You know, there's lots of little details here, and it's easy to pick these things apart as, well, there's problems with implementing this, but these are really plans to achieve the targets. There's no consequence or jeopardy if they're not met, other than that the climate may not improve as quickly. In my work, I can say that as such actions will have a positive impact on the climate, the economy, and our community, including utility infrastructure costs and utility prices. What I think is most important is the community outreach, which will result in great benefits. For example, people don't know that if you electrify your home, like we have, that you can cap your gas line and you can get $1,000, several $1,000s in credits through the Smart Homes program that PG&E has, which we are doing. And this can reduce the cost of the overall gas system. And if you have solar panels plus storage, you get an electric vehicle, all these things can help to reduce the electrical infrastructure costs. So the whole energy transition will save money as a whole as more people implement it, which is why such local actions are important. The utilities are not necessarily taking the lead on this and doing things like putting in microgrids. So I look forward to San Ramon stepping up and being a leader by adopting this climate action plan. Lastly, I think the work of the task force demonstrates the need for a committee or commission to continue the work. It's going to be an ongoing iterative, process. And so I thank everyone here for their work on moving this forward, and let's give it a chance to keep up the good work. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Sue Bach.
I'm a little shorter. It's okay.
I'm Sue Bach. I'm a member of the CAP Task Force. I'm also the representative from the city as climate organization of San Ramon Valley Climate Coalition. And thank you for reviewing the CAP. It was long, arduous, and many, many hours were put in by the CAP Task Force to make the climate action plan what it is now. It was very extensive. And being part of the CAP Task Force has been an honor. I appreciate the professionalism of the staff. Rincon Consulting, fabulous, and the leadership of Ryan Driscoll. I can't speak, sorry. I also felt my voice was heard in the process. And even if we didn't always agree, the brain trust of the members of the task force were inspiring. I'd also like to emphasize some things for the Planning Commission to consider for the city's short and long-term goals that, if addressed, will improve the quality of life in San Ramon. Some are already addressed in the General Climate Action Plan, and these are more in general of the walkability of the city, the bikeability of the city, and that's part of the general plan. According to Walk Score, San Ramon is considered a car-dependent city. When you have something like that, you're going to have more greenhouse gases. Bike scores. Davis is the #1 bike community in the state and on the Pacific Coast. Berkeley is #2. San Ramon is 95. That's in the state. Some say that the cost of making changes to become a climate-friendly city will be too high. As a retired ICU nurse at San Ramon Regional, I can tell you that the impact of climate has an impact on our kids and the adults. And consider the cost of doing nothing. Fines from the state for noncompliance with CEQA, a decreased quality of life for us residents here in San Ramon, and putting kids and adults at risk for healthcare issues, driving costs up. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And I agree totally with it was a full vote in favor of the CAP task force to adopt the CAP.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Chirag Katrani.
You left? Oh, no. Okay,
That's it. No
That's
other
it.
speaker cards.
all right. Anyone else? No? Okay, we're going to close public comments then. All right, gentlemen, discussion. And ladies, sorry. It's an old habit. Comments, discussion. Huh? Sure, ladies first.
I do have, I know, the CAP. Well, first of all, thanks for the public comment. I appreciate you two coming up here and sharing and all the work that you've put into the CAP and to city staff as well as Rincon Consultants and Ryan who led the, CAP on a staff level. So I guess my question is in relation to the 15183 exception. I know that's mentioned within the CAP and it's more toward the back of the final report. When I was looking or kind of trying to determine like, okay, what project, because it mentions if the city of San Ramon goes ahead and adopts the CAP. That being said, with the adoption of it, if a project comes and has significant greenhouse gas emissions, that would, kick up CEQA. With this, it would, be a project would be able to go ahead and not have to go through, something like an EIR or an ISM. And well, no, it would just be like an EIR, right? Because it would be a significant and unavoidable impact. So when I was looking at this checklist, figure 2, it then references a compliance checklist about allowable greenhouse gas emissions by type of development. And it lists existing development versus new development, residential, non-residential. So I guess my question for you, Ryan, is, okay, I'm a developer. I'm going to have, significant greenhouse gas emissions. What do I have to do to show the city that I'm complying with CAP? Like, yeah, it's kind of hard to read when I was like looking through
Yeah,
this.
this is a good question. I think this is an important part of the CAP update. We didn't discuss it in the presentation as much, but as part of the CAP update, we've also prepared a GHG threshold report. That's the second document that was attached. And so we will be using that for any development project or long-term planning project that is entitled or approved through 2030. If we'll have a checklist, it's not in here, that will be provided by the consultant team once it's adopted. But there'll be a checklist which we'll use to verify that it will then it will comply with the numbers in the CAP update. So what's important is that housing projects or commercial projects will not need to do any additional GHG analysis if they meet the CAP through the checklist. If there is a project that has different land use assumptions or demographics than what's currently in our general plan, then they would need to use the thresholds that are in that report. And that would be used for the additional analysis they would have to do. But what's important is that it will streamline the review for housing and commercial projects through 2030 with that checklist.
I've seen that checklist in other cities. Is that something that, staff would have prepared when it goes to city council for approval at that point in time?
It
Seems
won't
like
be
yes.
prepared with this document right now. It's more like an implementation
Okay.
aspect of the CAP update and the thresholds report. We'll use it for individual projects in the future. We'll likely, have the applicant respond and demonstrate that they meet the requirements through the checklist. And so we'll review it for individual projects when they come forward, but it's
Okay.
implementation.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
Mhm.
I think that was pretty much my big question. I think it would be, yeah, I mean, it's in line with other cities and communities in the nearby area who have also undergone a CAP. Like that checklist is pretty similar to other cities, I'm imagining.
Yeah, it's part of the qualified CAP
Okay.
process that was required as part of our mitigation measure too for the General Plan 2040 EIR. So yeah, that's the benefit to the city, adopting the updated CAP and the thresholds that are in checklist through this update.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I think that's my questions for now. Okay.
Sugars.
First, I want to thank Mr. Driscoll, the consultants, the CAP team, task force team, and those that gave public comments. I think this is a very important topic that we're discussing. One of the things that I look at when I'm looking at any type of document that we're in front of is through the lens of people, planet, and prosperity. So how does it impact people? How does it impact our planet? And how does it provide prosperity to those in this community? I think that this does a great job of benefiting all three, right? In terms of health benefits for the people in this organization, this city. Obviously, it protects the planet by reducing greenhouse gas, and obviously creates prosperity by implementing new types of technology, potentially even new types of jobs that could be even built here in San Ramon. Well, I do also agree with the comment that our speaker had in terms of we are a driving city. I do think that there is some kind of disconnect sometimes between how we're planning our city as a walking city and this plan itself. And I do think that in the future, we really need to identify how we are going to help reduce that impact, because as someone who's lived in San Ramon for many years and in this valley, I can tell you a lot of people drive outside of the city. You know, we talked about leakage to other places in Danville and stuff like that, because there are less and less options for people to do things here in this city. And so those people are going to be still driving through the city or driving outside of the city. But I do think this is a great step in that direction. And so I definitely think that this is a good plan to move forward with.
Commissioner Albert? Oh, we're working our way down.
So I would like to try and provide some comments and context for what I think is our role, and that's to send comments to the city council. First of all, I think most of the initiatives in here are individually valid and beneficial, but at the end of the day, they're policy questions that are up to the city council to adopt, not the planning commission. So my role is not to set policy. Again, that's the city council. And so I think what is important for my role as a planning commissioner is to send and ensure that the city council has the information available to them to make smart policy decisions. And so I think giving them the entire document without some additional information makes it really difficult for them to make budget decisions, staffing decisions, headcount decisions. So in that vein, my suggestions for the final document are in 4 or 5 categories. And I would probably start with number 1, staff a resource to be able to build a work plan, and I think that needs to be highlighted for our city council so that they can make a budget decision. The second area is around implementation, timeline, and phasing. We see a lot of short-term, medium-term, long-term, phase 1, phase 2, phase 1, 2, phase 1, 2, 3. Phase 1 is 25, 26. And so I think we need to ensure that if we are committing the city to implementing something in 25, 26, resourcing is needed like 6 months ago, not 6 months from now. Otherwise, we'll be, and I hate to say it, we will be behind our implementation timeline before we even get started. And I think it needs to be very clear to our city council that if they choose to adopt some or all of the phase 1 or phase 1, 2 initiatives, they need staffing for it, because I don't personally believe that the city is sitting around with a lot of excess resources to repurpose them to implementing many of these new actions. Although, as Lauren said, a lot of these things are being done, just not documented or captured in a cohesive manner. Second, I think that there needs to be a little bit more information for our city council to be able to understand funding strategies. We've heard grants and partnerships and city budget, at least to get some ballpark estimates. They're currently in budget season, and they're going to adopt a budget by June 30. And if we need funding to implement any of these things, I think they need to know about it before they vote to just adopt it or not adopt any one of these initiatives. And I think some of these others really do start to fall from when it's properly staffed, such as metrics for success. And in my world, we always have key performance indicators. So, have we done X by Y the date? And I think that they should see that, but I kind of think that's going to probably fall out of having the right staffing to build a plan, there. And then lastly, there are a number of initiatives that are partnering with other organizations or other, city, county, state groups or private enterprise. I think it would be helpful for them to understand that it's not a unilateral decision. It's that, and if you've already had discussions with any of these other organizations, whether it's PG&E or schools or Contra Costa County, that those are already in process, or it's something that's a future work activity that needs to be captured. And so I guess to kind of circle back, I think the number one recommendation is probably, I think that IMP2, which is to appropriately staff the position to turn this into action-oriented plans with, SMART goals with the resources identified. So again, like my fellow commissioners, thank you for all the work you've done and the detail you put into the document. I do appreciate that, and thank you for your time.
Commissioner Wallace.
I'm going to riff a little bit on Commissioner Alpert's comments. He's correct that this plan is really a suggestion to the city council to develop a work plan which requires funding and staffing, and he's right about that. The budget workshops the city council has had over the last two sessions shows a structural deficit for the next fiscal year of around $6 million. Now, the council is proposing and hopes to patch some of that with the new revenue from the temporary Measure N, but we don't know what exactly will be coming in from that source. So at the moment, the idea that the city has a lot of money to devote to these particular issues, I think is not well taken, and it would behoove the city council to dig down a little bit further into what is really important in terms of effectively changing the greenhouse gas emissions produced in San Ramon. Now, the chart that the consultant and the CAP committee put together basically says that 90% of our greenhouse gas emissions really amount from two areas. One is transportation, and the other is energy, natural gas and electricity. Those are the big ticket items, and if the city's going to do anything to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that's where it needs to start. On the issue of transportation, which is 52% of our greenhouse gas emissions, what the report looks at is basically two different areas. The first is to get people out of their cars in order to get where they want to go. The second is to change the type of cars they drive. With respect to getting people out of the cars, there's basically two major efforts that the plan proposes. One is to use trails and roadways for people to use non-vehicular transportation to get from point A to point B. Now, I live in Doherty Valley. The main employment area in San Ramon is Bishop Ranch. There's two ways for me to get to Bishop Ranch from where I live. The first is to go up and down the hills on Crow Canyon Road, and the second is to go up and down the hills on Bollinger. I do not believe that trying to do a bike or walk route from the majority of San Ramon, after all, about half the city of San Ramon is in Doherty Valley, is a realistic way to remove vehicular traffic from the city of San Ramon. They're not going to be able to walk or ride a bike. Maybe some people are, but I guarantee you the 60-year-olds like me are not going to be doing that. The second is the consultant has come up with a concept of changing 37 miles of current roadway that involves vehicles into a bike or walk only system. That's what an active transportation corridor means. Again, that's not going to be suitable for moving people from point A to point B, I don't believe. First of all, Doherty Valley, where half the city lives, doesn't have any place to go for groceries and stuff outside of the shopping center by my house. Second of all, active transportation corridors work in places where there's things for people to do along those corridors, say the Mission District in San Francisco. San Ramon isn't set up that way. We are a suburb with homes, not retail areas. The retail area we have right now is Civic Center, City Center. That's not conducive to what they're talking about in terms of an active transportation corridor. Measure T4 says to use affordable housing in higher density areas to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Well, we've already done that. This panel knows better than about anybody in the entire city that with the way that Bishop Ranch is being structured now, and with the way the Orchards is being structured, that was in front of the ARB last week, the central core of San Ramon will be A, dense, and B, walkable. So we've already done the bulk of that work already. Measure T6 is really, it seems to me, the key. That is to reduce passenger vehicles emission to 100% electric. Two things about that. The first of all, passenger vehicle decisions are made by individuals. They're not made by the city. The city has no control over what type of vehicles people buy. So what we can do is to moderate the effects of people making decisions that don't involve total electrical vehicles. Now, if you have a fully electric vehicle like a Tesla or a Rivian, I would be willing to bet you that anyone who owns those has already made a decision how they're going to charge their car. So to the extent they live in single-family homes, they already have the plan to do that. There's very little, it seems to me, the city can do on that regard. Where the opportunities for passenger vehicles are in multi-family housing. Now, historically, we have required electric chargers for multifamily and also for office buildings. What I think the city ought to look at, and this comes under the concept of a REACH code, is whether there should be a set aside for a certain number of parking spots in multifamily housing, like apartments, for electric charging vehicles. Now, I think that will be somewhat controversial, but if the city is going to spend its time and money looking at ways to change how cars operate in San Ramon, that would be one of the first places I would look at. T7 talks about emissions for commercial vehicles. Now, the fact of the matter is the city cannot control what type of vehicles drive in the city of San Ramon. If UPS is making a delivery in Danville and drives over to San Ramon, we can't keep the UPS truck out of San Ramon because it uses gasoline. What we can do, to a certain extent, is to encourage EVs by making it easier to do that. I question whether forcing areas to have electrical vehicle chargers that will service commercial vehicles is really feasible. But again, 52% of the emissions come from vehicles. And if the city is going to spend its time and money to do that, they really should look at whether a REACH code would be useful to service commercial vehicles. The other part of the greenhouse gas emissions plan, it deals with two things, natural gas and electricity, and they are combined. We want to get rid of natural gas and use electricity. Both of them currently have greenhouse gas emission issues. The first thing that I want to note is that for residential, as was pointed out by Mr. Barr at one of our meetings, the 2022 energy rules require that residential buildings, at least single-family homes, are plumbed basically with all electric lines for stoves, dryers, heating and air conditioning systems. As Mr. Barr pointed out at that meeting, for a developer to be required to put in electric lines to service all those big users of electricity, and then also run gas lines into those same areas, so if you can cook with a stove and you have a gas-fired furnace, makes no sense. And that's why if you look at all the buildings that we've approved in the last couple of years, they're all electric. So the heavy lifting has already been done for at least the single-family homes planned in San Ramon, which basically includes the city village clones that are planned for Bishop Ranch. In 2026, in January, there will be a new energy code that will be adopted as of January 1st. That also tightens the requirements for electricity over natural gas lines. It also includes rules dealing with substantial alterations or additions to existing buildings. That means there may be some opportunities for the older buildings that already exist to be required to change some of their HVAC or stoves for electric rather than gas. Now, I wasn't able to pull up the exact rules for that, but I know that's on the boards to do that. Those two things alone would be a significant change and diminution in the greenhouse gas emissions. There has been some discussion about whether a REACH code ought to be adopted that would require substantial alterations of existing commercial or residential buildings in the city to adopt electric stoves, electric HVAC, and electric dryers. Since that is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions other than our cars, if the city is going to spend time and money trying to make a significant, realistic, real-world impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it is my recommendation that the City Council look at the feasibility of adopting a REACH code that deals with replacement for those particular systems on existing homes. There is obviously going to be some controversy over that, but I think, as was discussed at some of our meetings, the economics of replacing a gas-fired furnace with a heat pump or a gas-fired stove with electrical lines or your gas-fired dryer with an electric dryer are getting to the point where it makes economic sense, even apart from maybe any grants or refunds you get from the government, which is always iffy. So I think that that's a place where our city council has an opportunity to make a quality decision that will change the situation in San Ramon for the better. They may decide that the economics or the political consequences are not worth it, but of the 137 actions that this plan suggests, this would be one of the ones at the top of my list. Most of the actions, and there's 100, I counted 137 or maybe 140 that this plan proposes, most of them deal with interaction between city staff, which hasn't been budgeted, and other agencies, Central SAN, things like that. A lot of it has to do with education of the public. Again, these are unfunded programs. With respect to education, I would guess that the average San Ramon adult has at least an AA degree, if not a BA. I think that is 98% of the adult population understands that we are in a climate change era, that changes have to be made. I'm not sure that they really need much in the way of education other than for opportunities to do things like get the refunds, get the rebates that may be available, certain type of investment decisions they're going to make. Before we spend a lot of time and money of staff time to do that, I would really consider whether that's a useful use of what limited resources we're going to have for at least the next 2 years. I think that this is I would say that this is a very comprehensive plan. I think that everything has been thought out. But like most things in life, and as Commissioner Alpert pointed out, we're dealing with a finite budget in the city of San Ramon. And I think that at least at this point, maybe things will change later on, but I think at least for this current cycle, which is 25 to 27, that the council needs to sit down and look realistically at the things it can do and the city can do that will make a meaningful difference in the greenhouse gas emission situation in San Ramon. The opportunities are there, but they have to be thoughtfully planned out and paid for. And as Commissioner Alpert pointed out, these are all policy decisions by the City Council. And I'm glad that they have that job and not us. So thank you for your time and the work that you've done. And I look forward to seeing 5 years from now where things look.
Thank you, Commissioner Wallace. So I have similar kinds of comments that you've heard already. And I want to say that, number one, I'm going to deal with budget issues because I did sit down with the chart and counted up how many times a proposal was designated as low, moderate, or high. I looked at the numbers that were given and opted for the top number just to see how this was going to pencil out. So there were 10 items at the low level, and again, that was left at $50,000, so that's $500K. and staff time in 250 hours of staff time. In the moderate level, where the maximum is considered to be $500,000, there were 11 items. So that gives you 5.5 million and 2,000 hours of staff time. And in the high category, where it's greater than 500,000, there were 3 items for which, at a minimum, be 1.5 million, and the number of staff hours was not indicated. So it has already been mentioned, the budget issue in the city of San Ramon. I worked on the Measure N. I was willing to talk to my neighbors and say the city, to maintain the quality of life, they needed the tax measure. But it was because we were looking at real costs of, the changes in the economy. Inflation has hit the city, healthcare for staffing. Those are real numbers. So when you look at something that adds up to $5.5 million in a budget that may or may not be not quite coming out of its $14 million deficit before Measure N, this is a big ask. And yes, it's over time, but nevertheless, all these actions do have costs. And when you say hire a staff member, it's not just a salary, it's benefits, it's retirement, it's insurance, those sorts of things. So budget issues. I do think it was interesting. I just read this morning an article about electric vehicles for agencies, that they are putting a measure before the assembly to modify the mandate, because there are a number of special districts that are saying we need to make sure our vehicles can be ready to go in any emergency at any time, and to have a fleet of only zero emission vehicles is not practical and it's not safe. So that is a safety issue along those. I do also want to raise the issue in the number of times in the plan it says, reach out to our underserved communities and inform them of XYZ. It was so often that my response was, what about their privacy? How many times does that community want us to say or to imply that unless we send a staff person out to tell them this, they are not aware of it? For example, to inform our underserved community that there are trails. I find that I can't be a party to something that sounds so demeaning. And so I struggle with that one in this issue. I think right now, as Commissioner Wallace mentioned, we are in some dicey times as far as funding. We are seeing both the state go broke, and we have a federal government that is looking to tighten their purse strings and to ask agencies to really prove how the money is going to be spent, where it's spent, and if you really need it. We don't know how long that's going to last. We don't know. We just don't know. And so as we are having a plan that says to investigate all of these partnerships with other agencies, I think that is asking a leap of faith given our current times. And I also want to say that one of the things that struck me about measures that, as we are developing these plans and we say that this is the reach code we're going to imply, it locks in a certain level of thinking. And one of the things that is very possible is some innovative thinking that we don't know yet. But if we only say that, well, in 2025, we decided that this was the only way to go, think of all the things that we don't know we could be creating or being party to. So finally, what we are discovering is that in terms of housing and appliances, as Commissioner Wallace mentioned, that customers also have budgets that they're managing. And if it makes economic sense to replace something for a rebate, people will. If it makes economic sense to change out your car, people will. So that's some of those. So for us to say, well, we must make an ordinance about it, does not give the consumer the opportunity to be a participant. And finally, I'd like to say that I personally have tried to convince people the merits of changing the California driving licensing age to 22. And people look at me like I have lost my mind. However, if we are really, and if this group and those who hear this are really serious about reducing the amount of driving, how about we target a population that drives on whim? There is no reason our teenagers have to be dropped off at schools. There's no reason a teenager could not learn to use public transportation, walk, and or bicycle. And I will account that there are special cases where people will not be able to self-mobilize, but nevertheless, I think it is a target population that really needs to be looked at. And I could absolutely support that, not to mention the accidents, insurance, and all the other things that come along with teen driving. So I would support that, and that's not in the action plan. So I think it is wide-reaching. I look forward to ways for out-of-the-box thinking and innovation. I am a strong believer that the free market is also a powerful force, should we allow it to work the way it was designed in capitalism. And so I know this is going to the city council, but I also know that as we learned the last episode that we sent something to the city council, what we say really does carry a great deal of weight. And so I want to make sure that everyone's comments are thorough and thoughtful and on the record. So last comments from anyone before we move on? Okay, so thank you very much. I think that is our portion of the comments as we go forward and send this off to the next level here.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Could we just get a straw vote to move this forward to city council with comments provided, just to go on the record that we're moving it on?
Okay, and it was not part of what you asked us to do, but
Yeah, it can just be a voice motion and
The voice mode.
Yeah.
okay. Is there a motion, gentlemen, ladies?
I'll move that we share this with the city council with capturing the bulk of the comments that we shared, because there are a lot of them.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, you want to just do a voice vote?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, anyone opposed? Hearing none. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Deep breath. All right, item 11, study session, commissioner liaison reports, interest items, and staff report. Do we have any liaison reports? I know I do, so go ahead.
I attended the Open Space Committee in April. One of the things you heard tonight was the idea of having a update on our bike master and trails plan. That actually is underway. They've hired a consultant. They have a 3-phase program to make sure everybody in San Ramon over the age of 5 years old knows about our trail and hike system. That's going to be going on through the summer into the fall. Also, we have, as you know, the Art and Wind Festival coming up in a couple of weeks. The Open Space Committee is also having a booth at that. So drop by, say hello, bring a beer, in the case it's warm. I also attended, believe it or not, the Climate Action Plan Task Force meeting last month. And I heard the comments from our committee members. And of course, as you know, they voted to adopt the plan. I also attended the ARB meeting, #1 on the orchards. Now, it was done by the Architectural Review Board. The funny thing was they didn't review any architecture. What they reviewed were the site plans for the orchards. Now, we have seen sort of a 10,000-foot view. Theirs was down to about 5,000 feet. It was consistent with the plan that we approved. But in terms of the expertise of the Architectural Review Board, I don't think they were tasked very much. Now, there are 2 more meetings scheduled, one of which is this Thursday, and there'll also be one in June. So maybe they'll have an opportunity to actually get some mileage out of the Architecture Review Board. I did have one comment for staff at the meeting. It was done in the room at the end of the hallway. I will say that the acoustics in that room are such that the people in the audience could not hear what was being said either by the committee or by the presenters. And that was true for everybody, at least that I talked to there. So I have a suggestion. Actually, I have 2 suggestions. The one is if we had a microphone or 2, because you would want for each side, that would enable this to be a true public hearing because the public could actually hear what was being said. The other change would be to teach the people on both sides of the table to project a bit so that the people in the audience, assuming they want to have the audience hear things, can actually hear what was being said. Our Architecture Review Board is very bright people, and the presenters that were there from Sunset are very experienced developers, and I'm sure that if we were able to hear a lot of what they said, we would get a lot out of it. So my request to staff is to increase the acoustics in that building, because for an area that's 2,500 homes, 92 acres, that deserves to have a hearing that people can actually hear.
Anybody else? Okay.
2 things. I also attended the same meeting as Commissioner Wallace at the ARB, and Commissioner Wallace is correct. The first ARB presentation was really truly just an overview of the project. There are 2 more ARB meetings scheduled this Thursday and first week in June, because it is so large. And as you would all recall, over the summertime, we had multiple public hearings to learn about the project. So it's an awful lot to swallow. I would encourage people, if you're interested, to take a look at the city's webpage and download the plan. And if you recall the city walk master plan, it's small compared to this. You know, it's a very large, thorough document with architecture, design, everything else. As Commissioner Wallace said, it will be 2,500 plus homes, 125,000 square feet of retail, and it is targeted for roughly a 20-year build out. So, you know, it's going to be very exciting. And then also I attended the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting a few weeks ago at this point, and there was primarily an overview of the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, as it relates to transportation, which usually includes things like pavement management, some street widening projects. For example, Bollinger, they're going to study that a bit. There's citywide bicycle network improvements, the Crow Canyon Road, Doherty Road intersection, and then some signal projects, continue to expand the citywide intelligent transportation system upgrades, some special kinds of walk signals, and pedestrian enhancement devices. So it was pretty thorough. And then for the second item on their agenda, those of us that had children that went to Cal High, and you recall dropping your children off at the backside on Mangos Drive, they're adjusting the no parking zone, because what they're finding is that a combination of buses stopping on Mangos and parents stopping in the street, it's creating quite the mess. And so they're adjusting where you can stop and not stop. And, you know, and that's a whole long process to figure that out. And then it always includes a little bit of enforcement and signage. So the committee did endorse that project, but that was the tack.
Down here? Okay, so I sat in watching the Parks and Community Services meeting for this month, and I did want to, actually last month, sorry. And they did also the CIP program. And one of the things that was really remarkable for me is that they are estimating that, well, there's a whole series of improvements that have to happen at Cal High Olympic Pool. And it is a 5-year plan, but the targeted cost is $12.5 million. And I was quite shocked and stunned, and there was a lot of conversation and questions about what did that include. The pool is not up to code. It's a 50-year-old pool. it's not up to current safety codes, competition codes, and all kinds of other things. And so it will require a great deal of capital infusion. And so it's kind of a, that's a big ticket item. And then they talked about other things, including the $1 million for the Crow Canyon, the first phase of it. Unfortunately, they're finding things like mold and asbestos and lead paint. So not promising. And, but anyway, they went through the budget, had lots of questions, and so they are working on their capital improvement plan. Art and Wind Festival coming up, pretty excited about that, and some other public events. So Parks and Rec, or not Parks and Rec, sorry, Parks and Community Services are growing, and they are mentioning that raising the cost of some of the summer camp programs, they're reaching the intersection where raising the cost is declining the enrollment. So they're trying to find the sweet spot between how much it costs to run those camps and those classes to maintain the number of participants. And they're trying to figure that sweet spot. So to keep it all going. So thank you. All right. Staff report? And no, does anyone, staff, do you have reports? Sorry, I'm looking on my script here. I know you do.
We'll start with the calendar. So we are looking to cancel May 20th.
Okay.
We
You're off the
have,
hook. I won't be here.
okay. June 3rd, we have the Heritage Park Public Art piece coming back. It's working its way through Parks Commission this week, or next week's. We have Little Bridges Daycare coming to the commission, and then Eden Housing will be coming back to the commission on the 3rd. On the 17th, we have we anticipate a couple of study sessions. They haven't quite landed in our inboxes yet, but we anticipate we'll have a couple items on that meeting, potential development projects. And then we're also working on the year in review that we do every year to recap of all the efforts you've done to date. Then on a different note, couple of staffing changes that we've had. I think most of you are aware that at mid-year we had an associate planner position approved with a housing emphasis, and we did a recruitment for that. And after several months of work, I'm pleased to say that Annalisa Garcia, our current assistant planner, qualified for that position and was the unanimous candidate for that.
Oh,
So
excellent.
she's been promoted to associate planner. And that created a void at our assistant planner. So we also went off the same qualification list of people, and Lucas Haas has been promoted to assistant planner. And
Congratulations. to
so
both of
now
them.
we are recruiting for a new planning specialist. But we're pleased that we were able to add a body through our budgeting process. So we'll have
Fantastic.
one more person.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we like them. So congratulations to them and to you guys as well for finding great people.
He's hiding.
Congratulations. Well done.
And that's all I have for now.
Okay, great. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, I did ask earlier about the posting of the Planning Commission openings. I understand that is coming up.
It actually opened today.
Okay,
Yeah, an
And it-
email just went out.
Yeah, and it closes on the 15th, 21st. I think we're
21st.
here. Yeah, 21st.
okay. All right, looking forward to seeing returning people. Just dropping a hint here. All right, so here it is.